Almost everyone is reading less than they were even a decade ago, and it's really easy to blame things like social media or our education system for this widespread decline in reading. But for those of you who have noticed that you're reading less than you used to, and you want to do something about it, you're looking for something less analytical and more practical. So today I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how you can start reading again. I like to break these problems down into their parts. And so we're going to talk about the reasons why adults say that they can't read. Then we'll go on to issues about picking the right books for you and a few practices that I like to do that helps me read more and also that helps me read better and enjoy what I'm reading. When adults are asked why they don't read, they give one of three answers. They say they don't have time, they can't focus, or they blame social media. The truth is that reading takes time. And if you decided that you want to start reading again, then the first thing you have to do is to find time in your schedule to read. For those of you with jobs or with families, this can be difficult to do because work and family have a way of eating up all of your time. So what you have to do is just find a little bit of time throughout your day where you can start reading again. You don't need to wait until you have the perfect conditions, a perfect chair and an hour of silence with no distractions. Because if you're waiting for those perfect conditions, frankly, you're probably never going to get around to reading. I think it's helpful to remember that if you can read for just 15 minutes a day, then you will read about 10 books a year, assuming books take anywhere from 8 to 10 hours to read. Obviously, that will depend on the sorts of books you're reading and how long they are, but it's a helpful number to keep in mind. By reading just 15 minutes a day, you can drastically increase the number of books that you read. And if you're able to read for an hour a day, then suddenly reading 30 or 40 books in a year isn't off the table, and suddenly it becomes a little easier to see how some people manage to read 100 books a year or even more. But don't focus on the numbers. The numbers are not actually the important part here. If you want to start reading again, the important part for now is simply just finding time to read. I almost always am carrying a book with me, and the idea is that whenever I have some downtime, instead of picking up my phone, I can simply just read the book instead. That makes it a lot easier to find some time to read. If you go to work and you have a lunch break, if you take a book with you on your lunch break, suddenly that opens up easily 15 minutes, maybe 30, maybe even a whole hour where you can read. Back when I lived in Boston, I used to take the T everywhere. So as I'm riding on the subway, instead of scrolling on my phone, I would read a book. You're just looking for those little places in your life where you can fit reading in again. The place I highly recommend trying to read, at least for a little while, is in bed before you go to sleep. If you can read for just those 15 minutes before you go to sleep, then you are well on your way to reading again. And it doesn't take a lot of extra planning. Just stay up an extra 15 minutes or go to bed 15 minutes earlier, and you've done it. I read every night before I go to bed, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes 30, sometimes an hour or two if the book is really good. I also sometimes will wake up early. In fact, for a long time, I was getting up at about 4 a.m. just so that I had time to read. So I would be up well before the rest of my family. It would be nice and quiet and I could read. It turns out that getting up at 4 a.m. to read threw off my sleep schedule so much that it made living a little bit difficult, but I still like to get up early and read before I go into my busy day. If you can carve out that 15 minutes a day, reading starts to become a habit. It becomes something you look forward to, and it becomes a source of pleasure. But if you're reading, you might worry that you're not going to be able to focus on what you read. And if you're not used to reading, this is a real challenge. You sit down, you open up a book, you read a few sentences, and then you think, I wonder what's going on Twitter or on YouTube. Or you get a notification and suddenly your focus has been totally broken. This is a real challenge for almost anyone in the modern world, but it is a solvable problem for most of us. We can train ourselves to focus for longer simply by reading. If we practice reading, which just means reading often and, paying attention to what we're reading, then we'll be able to go longer and longer without wanting to check our phones or without needing to go off and do something else. We'll be able to simply enjoy reading, and we'll be able to focus on what we're reading for long periods of time. That third reason that adults say that they can't read is social media. If social media is the kind of thing that is getting in the way of your reading, then it's just about finding a way to spend less time on social media. This can be difficult because algorithms and feeds and websites are designed to be as addictive as possible. And so it can be difficult to cut yourself off if you're used to being online all the time. But this is something we have to do if we want to reclaim our minds and be able to think clearly and focus on what we think actually matters. And if reading is something that actually matters to you, then it means you got to learn how to log off. There are only a handful of studies and surveys that try to track reading habits across very large groups, or at least only a handful that I could find. All of them seem to find one thing though, and that is that men are reading less than women. This is a trend that has started for a while and seems to be accelerating. Some people call this decline the male reading crisis. I don't really love that phrasing, but it's what we have. At least there is a problem where a lot of men have just decided reading is not something that they should do. I'm usually left unsatisfied with discussions about the male reading crisis, but my friend Jake recently had a video where he talked about this, and I thought he had some real insights, so I asked if he would hop on a call and we could talk about the problem. If you could start by saying that like you're Jake from Man Carrying Thing or something like that. I mean, there's a bit of artifice here, but I'm going to need a clip, to transition.
Right now? Okay. I'm Jake from Man Carrying Thing.
And Jake, I wanted to ask you what you think is standing in the way for so many young men, or just men in general, who aren't reading.
What is standing in the way? I mean, the sense of wasting your time. I mean, I don't know. I think there's so much drawing everyone's attention, especially the idea of needing to be productive at every moment. I mean, this is something that everyone's dealing with, but I think men are just, it's like culturally, it's just become that way with reading, that, it's just not especially reading fiction,
Jake and I hopped on a call and talked for about half an hour trying to figure out what were the biggest reasons why young men in particular weren't reading, and we came up with a few. At the top of the list was this worry that everyone wants to be productive all the time and reading doesn't feel productive, but there was also this sense in which maybe men just weren't picking the right books. Jake's idea is that men are told that they always need to be challenging themselves or pushing themselves, and so if they get back into reading, they decide that they're going to pick up Blood Meridian or Ulysses for their very first book. And for some people that might work and they might fall in love with reading that way, but other people are going to bounce off of those books and then they just aren't going to read anything at all.
I don't think young men especially want to have a good time. They want to die in a war, or maybe I'm speaking generally, but I think like there's not a lot of like social value from reading a book unless it is like you're conquering something. Like I mean, we were just talking about guys who haven't touched a book since high school wanting to read Ulysses or Moby Dick or something because it is or Blood Meridian now. That's the trend.
I kind of want to tell a guy who really liked Red Dead Redemption 2 that if you liked that, like maybe you reading a Western novel would be the kind of thing that you're into. But I don't know, it doesn't even come up in their minds.
But you tell them, hey, you should read a Western, and they go, what is the best Western? What is the hardest Western? What is the most brutal Western? And they say, I'm going to read Blood Meridian. And then they read the first page and they go, I don't know. I don't know about this.
Yeah. And also, if you read Blood Meridian, you're not really prepping yourself to go and read another Western novel and enjoy it. Like it's nothing like that. But that's an interesting thing, though, that there is this like sort of online dudes reading culture that's really into the hardest versions of those books. And I know, like, if you went to college at a certain time and you looked like me, you read a lot of David Foster Wallace, and there was something about like having Infinite Jest and like completing Infinite Jest, or reading Pension or something. And these got very much associated with like a certain kind of like lit bro. But there was something very appealing about like having conquered that novel. You kind of finish it and you feel like I've done, I'm never going to climb Mount Everest.
Men want to die in a war. They want to die in a war. They want to read Blood Meridian. They want to read Infinite Jest.
So maybe men are being told that they should only read certain kinds of books, like productivity books or business books, basically books that'll help them succeed rather than fiction. But they're also being told that there are certain books they shouldn't read, like in this article of Reading Red Flags that was essentially just making fun of men for reading certain kinds of books. So when someone decides they want to try reading again, well, they feel like there are certain books they have to read, and they're not picking books that they want to read. This is a really important point. I hear from people all the time who maybe watch videos like mine and they feel inspired and they decide that they're going to start reading again. So what they go out and do is buy Ulysses or the Brothers Karamazov, like a really hefty, big book that for some people, or even for most people, could be a struggle to read. Then when they can't finish it, they give up, and they don't just give up on that book, they give up on reading in general. I think what's happening here is that they're picking books that they think are important. They've been told that they're important. They've been told that they have to read these books, but they're not picking books that they actually want to read. And if you're not picking books that you actually want to read, well, reading is going to be a chore for you. Because remember, these are people who are telling me that they haven't read a book since high school or middle school. People who are lifelong readers, who read all the time, struggle to read Ulysses. If you haven't read a book in a decade, just picking up Ulysses is going to be a real shock for you. Now, look, some people are going to be able to just pick up Ulysses. It turns out they love it. That's amazing. But for quite a few people, a book like that can actually be the wrong choice. Not because you're not smart enough, but because you haven't built up that reading stamina or just gotten used to reading a book like that. And look, I love these big, weird, serious books. I think Moby Dick is maybe the best American book ever. And it is a strange book that often surprises people when they read it. But I don't only read those books. And I feel like if I told myself I could only read those books, I would just read less in general. If you were to look on my bookshelves, you would find works of philosophy. That's what I really love to read, but also history and general nonfiction. And of course, a lot of science fiction and fantasy, because I really love reading science fiction and fantasy too. What you need to make sure you're doing is picking the right book for you. So this point about picking the right books for you, this extends well beyond men. This applies to absolutely everybody who is trying to start reading again. I think that the number one piece of advice that I can give you is to find a book that you think you'll actually enjoy. Don't pick a book because you're being told that it's a book that you need to read. Instead, you should find a book, frankly, that's just fun. I know a ton of guys actually who hadn't read a book since high school, and every time they tried to read a book, they weren't able to. They were never able to finish it, and they found reading really boring. And what had happened was that reading had become a chore for them. It had been something that they didn't want to do, but they felt like they had to do. In fact, it reminded them of school when there were reading assignments and maybe they were punished if they didn't complete them. For these guys, I know two books that seem to always do the trick. One of them was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you're into science fiction at all and you want something that's funny and lighthearted, Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a fantastic book. It's short, and that helps quite a bit. But also it's very funny, and it's just going to carry you, and you might just really enjoy it, and maybe that's what kicks off this new love of reading for you. Another book that I found that does this is Ender's Game. It's another work of science fiction, but it's more military science fiction, and frankly, it's written kind of at the level of a YA novel, and I think that helps people ease back into reading. In fact, recently I built a little free library and put it up in my yard, and while I was making this video and thinking about how Ender's Game had helped so many people fall in love with reading, I bought a couple of Orson Scott Card books and I put them in there, and I have a feeling those books will be gone in a couple of days, and maybe that's going to start someone down this path where they can love reading again. You know, I actually went through a period of time where I didn't enjoy reading anymore. It was happening when I was in grad school. What had happened to me was that I was reading so much for grad school and for research that I just didn't read novels. I only read maybe one or two books for fun over the course of about a 4 or 5 year period. Near the end of grad school, though, I started reading books that I thought would be fun. Mostly I started reading more science fiction books, but within a couple of months, I was reading Dostoevsky, and that's when I found out that I really loved Dostoevsky. I don't think, though, if I had just jumped into Dostoevsky right when I had decided that I wanted to start reading again, it would have worked out all that well for me. And that's because I needed something to kind of ease me in. I needed to get some points on the board. That's why my second piece of advice is that if you are struggling to read, then you might want to pick short books rather than long books. Susannah Clarke's Piranesi, for instance, is a really great work of fantasy that I think a lot of people would read. Men, women, basically anyone who's open to fantasy would like Piranesi. I often say that's one of my favorite fantasy books, and I stand by that, but I've recently kind of been debating whether or not I like it better than her other book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. But I wouldn't recommend Jonathan Strange just to anybody, because Jonathan Strange is like 1,000 pages, it has footnotes, and it's weird, and it's fairly slowly paced. Piranesi, on the other hand, is under 300 pages, tells a fairly straightforward story, and it tells it beautifully. And I would say, hey, try to read this 300-page book before you dive into something much bigger, because I think you'll have fun while doing it, and that's going to actually help you, finish reading a book, and maybe you can start reading again. I'd say the same thing if you're looking at fantasy books for someone like Terry Pratchett. And I don't want this to be just a book recommendation video, so I'm just going to put some books down in the description. I'll write the titles and the authors and things. And these are just some short books that I think various people might like that can kind of help kickstart their reading journeys again. So let's say that you've started reading for 15 minutes a day again, and you've started with some short or some fun books, and it's going pretty well. What do you do next? If you're managing to read those books and you're finishing and enjoying them, then I think you have basically three options. One, you can continue doing what you're doing. That is a great strategy if you're happy, but it does eventually get a little stale. The other option is that you could go and explore other genres or other styles of books. If you're reading mostly one genre of fiction, like let's say you're only reading science fiction, you're going to want to branch out and find other genres that you might enjoy. I only recently found out, like within the last year, that I enjoy spy novels because I read John le Carré. I fell in love with his books. I just started reading them. And now there are hundreds or thousands of books that I could possibly read. So my reading horizons have expanded dramatically because I tried something new. That's thousands of hours of pleasurable reading that is now in my future because I was willing to experiment. You could also try reading more nonfiction. I suggest a lot of philosophy on this channel, but I think one way to go into nonfiction from fiction is to read biographies because they are telling stories. A good biography tells just as good of a story as a good novel. And you could also just learn about history. It's a fun way into history for some people, but just experiment, just have fun. Remember, what we're trying to do is just have fun while reading. We want you to start reading again. And if I want you to start reading again, I'm not going to give you too many rules. I'm just going to make suggestions that can make it pleasurable. I personally thrive on variety. Right now, I'm reading Plato's Republic. I'm reading a book called The Fatal Discord that's about like Martin Luther and Desiderius Erasmus. And it's a great little work of history that I'm really enjoying. But I'm also reading A Song for Arbonne, which is this fantasy novel by Guy Gavriel Kay. And I've been working my way through the essays of Michel de Montaigne. So what I'm doing is always giving myself some variety and always keeping things fresh. And because of that, I'm able to read a lot more. Then there is this third option where you can start pushing yourself. If you've started with books that are short and that are fun and you've branched out and you're still enjoying them, it might be time to try to tackle some of those books that you think you should read because maybe now you're ready for it. So how do you do that? We often call these books challenging because they are very long, they have very challenging language, or they don't have straightforward plots that make you want to keep turning the page. Think about like Ulysses or Infinite Jest or Blood Meridian. These are books that are written in notoriously strange styles, and that can be a little bit off-putting for some readers. In fact, the plot of Infinite Jest is very difficult to describe, and in many places is not really apparent to a reader. Lots of classic novels are like this. Things just kind of happen while the main character ruminates and thinks and reflects on the world. So you're reading it not just to enjoy the plot, but to enjoy something else about the book. The authors are trying to explore something deeper, or in some cases, they're just trying to explore the language they're writing in because they love it so much and they think it can be so beautiful. So if you're struggling to read these sorts of books, you just have to slow down. I had recently decided that I was not paying close enough attention to what I was reading, and maybe I was just kind of skimming, and I just wanted to slow down a little bit. I just wanted to make myself focus on the words in front of me. My thought was I would get more out of it, and probably more importantly, I would simply just enjoy it more. I have these traveler's notebooks. I got a brand new insert for it, and I started a new project where I have been writing down the first pages of books that I enjoy by hand. So this page right here is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Before that, it was John le Carré. I did a book by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Dispossessed. I have also recently copied the first page from this novel, Solenoid, which is this great modern novel. And soon I will be copying the first page of Boswell's Life of Johnson, this classic big work. While I'm doing this, I'm trying very hard to pay attention to all of the details. I'm holding myself to a fairly high standard and saying I want it to be perfectly accurate. There should not be a comma or an apostrophe out of place, not a single word misspelled. So that means I have to pay really close attention to what it is that I'm reading. It sounds like it could be tedious, but what it has made me do is just fall in love with some of these books all over again. I copied a paragraph from Borges from the Library of Babel, and I was simply blown away by it. I copied the first page of Moby Dick, and now I love Melville even more. By slowing down, I just found that I really loved these books in a way that I had previously kind of missed. It turns out that this is actually a very old way of learning how to write, learning the craft of writing, and learning to appreciate the art of writing well. This goes all the way back to the time when students would use wax tablets. The benefit of a wax tablet is that a student could copy something by hand to learn it well, to really understand it. Then it could be wiped clean, and then you could go back and write something else the following day. By copying language, these students learned how to write. You don't have to go that extreme if you don't want, but one way to make yourself slow down and really appreciate what you're reading is just always have a pencil with you, have a pencil in hand, and to practice what we sometimes call active reading. I would very lightly define active reading to say it's when you're reading slowly, you're reading carefully, you are underlining things that you find important or beautiful or sometimes difficult to understand. It doesn't have to go so far as taking robust notes or making lots of annotations. In fact, that could sometimes get in the way. But what it can do is just help you focus. And you're going to find that as you focus more on the things that you're reading, it's actually more pleasurable. This is something I think that gets totally lost in discussions about how to read more books or reading in general. That reading can be fun. Reading can be pleasurable. Reading can be something that you look forward to doing because it feels good. Not only is it good for you or helping you develop or become smarter or learn things or whatever, I mean, all of that's great. But on top of that, it's just simply fun to do. It's a source of pleasure. I have found that by forcing myself to slow down, it's like savoring a really good meal. It doesn't feel tedious anymore. It feels like the best way to enjoy what it is that I'm reading. So if you're struggling with some of these difficult books, some of these harder books, maybe you've decided, I'm going to finally read Infinite Jest or Ulysses or something. What you should do is practice active reading, read it slowly, let yourself enjoy it. These are complex texts. Good writers put so much into their books. They're so careful. And by just slowing down, you are actually allowing yourself to see some of these complexities, to understand it better, to appreciate it better, and maybe on top of that, you'll learn a thing or two. So I would say give it a shot. Give it a try. Try copying things by hand or practicing active reading to see if this helps you build that reading habit and helps you really start reading again. Reading before I fall asleep is one of my favorite things to do. Reading before bed is like one of those things that I just get to do rather than something that I have to do. The problem I now face is that I got this new mattress and I'm falling asleep faster than ever, which means I'm having a little bit of a harder time reading before I go to bed. And this new mattress is from NOLA. NOLA were kind enough to send me this mattress and to sponsor this video. NOLA is an award-winning mattress brand known for its cooling technology, exceptional pressure relief, and long-lasting durability, and it's conveniently shipped to your door for free. I got the NOLA Evolution. I chose luxury firm because I like to sleep on my back and I like it to be a little bit firmer. I also get very hot when I sleep, so making sure that the mattress is nice and breathable is important to me. NOLA has free shipping. It comes in a convenient box. You just get it out of the box, remove the plastic, and let it inflate, and then you're good to go. And my cat Carl, as you can see, likes this mattress too. I kept trying to push him off the bed so that I could film, and well, he kept jumping back on. Carl's brother, Bark, also likes the mattress, but he is camera shy. He just ran away. You can also just give this mattress a shot and see if you like it, because NOLA offers a 120-night sleep trial. You can get the mattress shipped to you, put it on your bed, give it a shot, and if you don't like it, you can return it. On top of that, they have a limited lifetime warranty. If you're looking to upgrade your sleep, head to nolamattress.com/Jared Henderson and use the code Jared Henderson to get an extra $50 off your NOLA mattress.